everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have another book review for you, and that is for The Rise of Tyrannotophia by Alex Grnja and Elmer Maurits. I don't know if I'm saying those names 100% correctly, but this is a very different book from what I usually review on this channel. This is a very unique case and something that I was very excited and interested in reading. This is one of currently 3 released books, which are from the metal band Distant, which is a band that I really enjoy. I've loved their music for several years now. And one thing that this band does that a lot of metal bands do, and something that I really like, is that they, for their lyrics, some bands will take stories that have already, been told and base their lyrics on like other stories. Like you have plenty of those for like Lord of the Rings and things like that. But one thing that other bands do is they create their own stories and they base their lyrics on that, which is what Distant does. But one thing that this band did that most bands don't do, who do that, is they actually released books which are based on the lore behind those lyrics. And so that's what this book is. This is the first of 3 that they have released. And this book covers the lore that is the basis of their first 2 albums. And so I was really looking forward to reading this because that's just such a unique and interesting idea for a book, and something you don't see very often. I wish that more bands did things like this. There's plenty of other bands that make their own original stories through their music, and I wish that they would release books based off them because I'd love to actually experience them in like a prose format. But I thought it would be really interesting to read. I really enjoy the band's music, and I always have appreciated that sense of storytelling with it, but I've never really looked into what these stories actually are. And so reading this, I thought would be a fun opportunity to do that. I did get these books in ebook, and there are no official covers for these books online, so I did have to make my own covers. So that's the one that you're seeing on the screen here, is a cover that I made using the album artwork for this band. And I got them in ebook because I would have loved to get these in hardcover, but between the expensiveness of the actual hardcover and shipping them from the Netherlands, it would have been rather expensive. So I got the ebooks, which I'm happy with, and so that's how I read these books. But to actually talk about these books a bit, or this book rather, this is the first of 3, like I said, and I enjoyed this one quite a bit. It was different, it was unique, but it was interesting. This book, the story of it is not told in kind of the usual that you would expect for a novel. It's not even really the length of a novel. It's a little under 200 pages. It's a little bit more than that technically, but the end of this book is all just their lyrics. So the actual book itself is probably around 170, 180 pages if I were to guess. So it's probably more like a long novella. But the structure and the story of it is more of just presenting this story and lore, not so much trying to tell like a usual like 3-act structure type of story or something like that. It's very much like if you were to go into like a video game like Dark Souls or something like that, which this book kind of evokes very similar feelings to the lore behind those kinds of games. Where if you were to just take the story of that lore and tell it, that's basically what this is doing. It's not telling like a usual kind of narrative that you would get out of a book. So it is a little bit different, but the story I think was interesting, and I think that it had some really cool stuff in it. The book in the setting is very evocative. It's very atmospheric. It has a strong sense of just a feel to it that I really enjoyed. It has this feeling of just darkness and despair and just that kind of thing, which is maybe not the happiest thing to read about, but it's something I really like. I really enjoy stories like that, and so I thought that it was very evocative in terms of the setting, in terms of the atmosphere, which is one of my favorite things about this book. Is just I got that constant just feeling as I was reading this book. You also have some interesting like actual events going on. Like I said, this is more kind of outlining bits of like the lore. So you have this character named the Tyrant who kind of comes into this realm of tormented souls and kind of becomes a sort of leader to them. and then has his successor who does some things, and there's some political things going on between the various different leaders and things like that. And things just kind of don't go super duper well, and it's interesting. There's a lot of interesting things that happen in this book that I thought were really cool. It was just a story that, like I said, it just had a strong sense of atmosphere and feel and things like that to it. The events that happen in the book really kind of carry that forward, and I think it was just really well done in that sense. And I also think that kind of the visual aspect of the book, for lack of a better term, is really well done. The descriptions of character designs, the descriptions of events as they happen, like I could visualize very well what was happening in this book, and there was just some really cool stuff going on that I just thought was really interesting. And the characters and the dialogue are decent. They're a little bit kind of flat, one-dimensional. You don't really get a whole lot of complexity with the characters or the dialogue. They mostly, I think, serve, like I said earlier, kind of to push the story and the atmosphere, which seems to be most of what this book is doing. But I think that they serve their purpose well and provide for interesting things to be read within the book. So even though they're not like amazing, they're fine, and allow for some interesting things to happen. And I also just really like the fact that a book like this exists. Like I said earlier, I wish that more bands would do things like this. So the fact that this does happen in this book is really cool, and kind of gives me a little bit more context behind the band's music. It fits the music very well, I think. Kind of the story and the sound of the music just kind of goes together really well. Like if you were to go and listen to Distance music, I think that you could get a very good idea of just the vibe of this book in general, and kind of hints for some other interesting things. Especially, I think one thing I also really enjoyed is at the end of the book with the lyrics. It does lay out what the lyrics are, but then it also has this small little section where it says exactly what part of the story the lyrics are referring to, which was also really cool. So you kind of do get a lot of more context behind the music and things like that, which is not necessarily something to do with the book itself, but it's something that I still appreciate about it. As far as things I didn't like quite as much with this book, the major thing that held this book back for me is just the writing itself. Like I said, this band is based in the Netherlands, and so you can tell that English is not necessarily like the first language of the people who wrote this book, which is not necessarily a big negative. Like, it's still readable. I can still read it just fine. But there are some grammar and editing things here and there that could have been cleaned up a bit, just to make things flow a bit better, make things read a little bit better, some repetition in words and things like that, which again is not a huge issue because what I was here for was the story and the atmosphere and all that stuff. So a little bit of less than perfect writing is not necessarily going to hold that back for me, but it is something that's still worth pointing out. I'm curious to see if that will improve in the later books. But that is the major thing for me, is that you can definitely tell that this was just someone wrote this and then just kind of put it out there. It's nothing that seems to have gotten too much of like an editing kind of job done to it or anything. But it's still fine. It doesn't bother me too much. The only other thing is that I do think that the characters were, like I said, a little bit flat, a little one-dimensional. I think that they serve the purpose of the book well because it's a short book. There's not a whole lot to go into with these characters. Like, even though they are somewhat one-dimensional, it feels like they, for the most part, kind of need to be. And so I don't think there was a huge amount more to do with them. And like I said, they mostly serve to just kind of push the story forward. So that isn't necessarily a huge issue. It's just I tend to really enjoy, characters. So that is something that kind of stood out to this for me. One last little thing that isn't also not a huge issue, but still something I noticed. This book is split into 6 parts. And part 6 is structured a little bit weirdly because it kind of messes with the timeline of this book a little bit, which I would like to be just a little bit better presented just so it's a little easier to follow. But other than that, I did really enjoy this book quite a bit. It had some really cool stuff going on with it, some fun twists and turns that I actually didn't expect with it. Like I said, a strong sense of atmosphere that I really enjoyed, and all that kind of thing. It's not a book that is like one of the greatest books I've ever read. It's not super amazingly deep and exciting characters or plot or things like that or world building, but it does all that stuff pretty well, and it has a strong feel to it that I really enjoyed, and tells a compelling story that, even though it doesn't fit kind of the normal narrative structure of like a novel, it's still a story that I think is interesting and has a lot of interesting things going on with it that I was always excited to see where things were going to go next. So as far as a rating out of 10 that I'd give The Rise of Tyrannotophia, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. It was a very unique story. Again, I just love that a book like this exists, and I wish more of them did. But I think it's really cool that Distant does this. I think that it is an interesting thing for the fans of the band to check out, and even, I don't know how much appeal this necessarily would have for people outside of their fan base. I don't expect that there will be a lot of people coming to this video who are not aware of who this band is, or would be interested in reading this book despite not being aware of who the band is. But I do think that it's an interesting story. It, like I said, has a strong sense of atmosphere and a very evocative setting and things like that. So I think there are good reasons to read this book outside of just being a fan of the band. But it definitely gives me more of an appreciation for the storytelling behind their music. I think it's a really cool book. So I enjoyed it a fair amount. So that pretty much wraps up this video. Let me know in the comments if you happen to have also read this book. Let me know in the comments if you happen to also be a fan of Distant. Let me know as well. If you have any thoughts on their music, any favorite albums or songs or things like that, let me know in the comments, because I am a big fan of this band as well. I really enjoy their music, hence why I decided to go ahead and pick up these books. And they're a band that I really like, so I wanted to support them. So that is pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.